The alarm screamed through the colony compound at exactly 600 hours. He undropped his coffee mug and ran to the central hall with everyone else. His boots slapped against the metal floor as hundreds of colonists poured into the meeting space. Aliens of every shape and size filled the room. The tall insectoid Velthar stood at the front, their multiple eyes scanning the crowd. "We have received a warning from the orbital station," Velthar announced. Their translator device made the clicking sounds into clear words. "A massive solar flare will hit our planet in 48 hours. The temperatures will drop to -200 degrees. The storm will last 6 months." The room exploded with noise. Everyone talked at once. Hyun felt his stomach drop. 6 months. Of that kind of cold would kill everything on the surface. He looked around and saw fear on every face, human and alien alike. The reptilian scientist Kai Moon stepped forward. His scales reflected the harsh lights above. "Do not panic. We have protocols for this situation. All species will enter their stasis chambers. The Veltharians will hibernate in their hive chambers. My people will use thermal stasis pods. Humans and others will use the cryo-sleep facility." Day grabbed Hyun's arm. "Did you hear that? 6 months of sleep. I've never done cryo before." Hyun barely heard his friend. His mind was already working through the numbers. He raised his hand. "What about power? The cryo facility needs constant electricity." Velthar's antennae twitched. "The facility has backup generators. They are designed for exactly this situation. Our technology has worked for thousands of years across hundreds of worlds. But the solar storm will destroy the power grid," Hyun insisted. He pushed through the crowd to get closer. "I've seen the facility plans. The generators need fuel deliveries every 3 months. Who's going to deliver fuel if everyone is asleep?" Ki-moon made a sound like rocks grinding together. It was laughter. "Human, you worry too much. The systems are automated. Everything will function perfectly." "Automated systems that rely on surface equipment," Hyun said. His voice got louder. "Equipment that will be buried under ice and hit by 400-kilometer-per-hour winds. What happens when the generators fail?" Velthar clicked their mandibles together sharply. "Enough. The decision is made. All colonists will report to their assigned stasis facilities within 36 hours. That gives you time to prepare. This meeting is over." The crowd began to disperse. Hyun stood still, his mind racing through calculations. Dai pulled him toward the exit. "Come on, we need to pack." Back in their shared quarters, Hyun pulled up the colony schematics on his datapad. He traced the power lines with his finger. Everything connected to the main grid. The cryo facility sat on the northern edge of the colony, exposed to the elements. The generators were outside the building to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning. "You're not seriously thinking about staying awake, are you?" Day asked. He was stuffing clothes into a bag. "The math doesn't work," Hyun muttered. "Look at this. The generators burn through fuel in 72 days. Even with reduced load, they'll die in 3 months. The backup batteries might give another week. Then everyone in cryo dies." Day sat down heavily on his bunk. "So what are you saying? That we're all going to freeze to death in our sleep?" "No." Hyun closed the datapad. "I'm saying someone needs to stay awake. Someone needs to maintain the systems. Someone needs to make sure the generators keep running." "That's suicide," Day said flatly. "Hyun, temperatures will hit -200. Nothing survives that. Humans survived Antarctica. We survived the Arctic. We survived space stations and moon bases." Hyun started pulling equipment from his locker. "We're good at surviving things we shouldn't." Over the next 30 hours, the colony transformed into organized chaos. Aliens packed belongings and said goodbye to friends. The Veltharians sealed their hive chambers with some kind of biological resin. The reptilians loaded their thermal pods onto transports. Humans lined up at the cryo facility for their pre-sleep medical checks. Hyun didn't pack. Instead, he gathered supplies. He raided the engineering depot for thermal suits, welding equipment, and portable heaters. He loaded a transport vehicle with food rations, water purification tablets, and medical supplies. He downloaded every technical manual in the colony database onto his datapad. Dee found him in the geology lab studying volcanic activity maps. Please don't do this. Come to the cryo facility with me. Hyun looked at his friend. They had known each other since training on Earth. They had traveled across space together. They had built this colony together. I can't, someone has to stay. Then let me stay with you, Dae said. No. Hyun shook his head firmly. One person has a chance. 2 people need twice the resources, and if I'm wrong, if the generators do work somehow, then you need to be alive to tell them I was an idiot. Dae's eyes were wet. You're the smartest person I know. You're never wrong about engineering. They hugged for a long moment. Then Dae left without looking back. Hyun made one last trip to see Velthar. The administrator was sealing their chamber, surrounded by their hive mates. Human Hyun, you should be in cryo sleep. I'm staying awake, Hyun said simply. All of Velthar's eyes focused on him. That is not permitted. You will die. Maybe. But if the generators fail, everyone dies. I'm going to make sure they don't fail. Your concern is noted but unnecessary. The systems are fail-safe. There's no such thing as fail-safe, Hyun said. There's only prepared and unprepared. I'm choosing to be prepared. Velthar was quiet for a moment. Then they reached out with one of their limbs and touched Hyun's shoulder. It was the first time an alien had voluntarily touched him. You are either very brave or very foolish, perhaps both. If you survive, the colony will owe you a great debt. If I survive, I'll just be happy to see you all wake up. 18 hours. Later, Hyun stood on the landing pad and watched the last transport lift off toward the cryo facility. The sky was already changing color. Dark purple clouds rolled in from the east. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees in the last hour. He was alone now. Alone on a planet about to freeze solid. Alone with his tools and his determination, and his very human refusal to give up without a fight. The first snowflakes began to fall. They weren't water. The atmospheric sensors said it was frozen carbon dioxide, dry ice falling from the sky. Hyun smiled grimly and headed toward the geological survey site. He had marked a spot where volcanic activity came close to the surface. If he could tap into that geothermal heat, he could build a shelter. If he could build a shelter, he could survive. If he could survive, he could save them all. The wind picked up. The storm was coming. Hyun started digging. The storm hit like a hammer 6 hours after the last transport left. Hyun was already 3 meters down in his excavation when the winds reached 200 kilometers per hour. His thermal suit groaned under the pressure. Ice crystals pelted his faceplate so hard he thought the glass would crack. He kept digging. The geological surveys had shown a magma chamber passing within 20 meters of the surface here. It was an old survey, maybe outdated, but it was all he had. Every shovel full of frozen dirt brought him closer to heat, closer to survival. By the end of the first day, he had dug down 7 meters. His muscles screamed. His hands were blistered inside his gloves. The temperature outside had hit minus 80 degrees and was still dropping. He had set up a basic tent over the excavation site, but the wind kept tearing at it. He spent an hour reinforcing it with metal poles scavenged from the colony. On the second day, he hit rock, solid volcanic rock that his shovel couldn't penetrate. He switched to a plasma cutter, the kind used for construction work. The tool whined and sparked as it bit into stone. Progress slowed to a crawl. He measured his advance in centimeters instead of meters. The temperature hit minus 120. On the third day, at 16 meters down, his glove pressed against the rock and came back warm. Not hot, but warm. Warmer than it should be. He wanted to scream with joy but didn't have the energy. Instead, he just kept cutting. He broke through on day 4. The plasma cutter suddenly plunged through into empty space. Hyun nearly fell into the hole. He widened the opening carefully, then dropped a light stick through. It fell for 3 seconds before clattering onto stone. The light revealed a natural cave formed by ancient lava flows, and the walls glowed with heat. Hyun lowered himself down on a rope. The cave was roughly 15 meters across and 10 meters high. The temperature inside was a pleasant 20 degrees. He could feel the heat radiating from the rock walls. Thermal imaging showed the magma chamber just 8 meters below the cave floor. He had found his shelter. The next week was a blur of exhausting work. He excavated a sloping tunnel from the surface to his cave, wide enough to move equipment. He reinforced the tunnel with metal supports. He installed an airlock system at the entrance to keep the heat in and the killing cold out. He moved all his supplies down piece by piece. The colony was visible in the distance, already half buried in frozen carbon dioxide snow. The lights were all dark. The power grid had failed on day 5, exactly as Hyun had predicted. He tried not to think about the cryo facility sitting in that darkness. On day 8, he made his first trip to the cryo facility. The journey took 3 hours in his reinforced transport vehicle. The wheels could barely grip the ice-covered ground. Wind speeds had reached 350 kilometers per hour. His vehicle was designed for rough terrain, but this was beyond anything the engineers had imagined. The cryo facility was a dark tomb. All the windows were buried. Hyun had to dig for an hour to reach the emergency entrance. Inside, the temperature had dropped to minus 30 degrees. His breath came out in clouds. The main generators were dead, frozen solid, but he had expected that. He made his way to the backup battery room. The batteries were at 40% charge. Without power input, they would die in another week. Then the cryopods would begin failing. People would die in their sleep, frozen from the inside out. Yoon spent 6 hours rewiring the facility's power distribution system. He bypassed the dead generators and connected everything to a portable fusion cell he had brought from the colony engineering depot. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it would keep people alive for another month. Before leaving, he checked the status displays. 3,217 colonists in cryosleep, all stable, all alive, all depending on him. The trip back to his cave took 4 hours because of increased wind speeds. He nearly died when his vehicle flipped on a patch of ice. It took all his strength to right it again. Back in the cave, he collapsed on his sleeping bag and didn't move for 12 hours. But he couldn't rest long. The fusion cell would last a month. He needed a real solution. He needed permanent power for the cryo facility, and he was just one human with limited supplies on a frozen hell planet. He started planning. The cave became his workshop and home. He set up a small hydroponic garden using grow lights and water from melted ice. The plants gave him fresh food and recycled his carbon dioxide into oxygen. He established a daily routine. Wake up, exercise, tend the plants. Work on equipment. Check supplies. Sleep. Every week he made the dangerous journey to the cryo facility. Every week he performed maintenance. He replaced air filters. He monitored the fusion cell's output. He kept 3,000 people alive. The loneliness was worse than the cold. He started talking to his plants. He named them. There was Lettuce Kim, who grew faster than the others. There was Tomato Park, who refused to produce fruit. There was Pepper Lee, his favorite, who always seemed to lean toward him when he walked past. He recorded video logs every day, just to hear a human voice, even if it was his own. Day 43. Storm intensity at 90%. Temperature outside is minus 172 degrees. Inside the cave, it's a comfortable 22 degrees. The geothermal heat is reliable. The plants are growing well. I'm running low on coffee. That's probably the worst part. On day 60, he nearly died again. His thermal suit tore on a piece of sharp ice during a trip to the cryo facility. The outside temperature was minus 190 degrees. He felt the cold rush in through the tear like knives. His skin started to freeze immediately. He was 3 kilometers from his cave, too far to make it back. His fingers were already going numb. His thoughts became sluggish. This was it. This was how he would die. Alone in the ice with no one to even find his body. Then he remembered something his old mentor Tae had told him during survival training on Earth. Pain means you're alive. Cold means you haven't quit yet. Move until you can't move anymore. Hyun started running. He shouldn't have been able to run. His body was shutting down. The cold was eating through him. But he was human, and humans were too stubborn to know when they were supposed to die. He ran for 40 minutes straight. His legs moved on pure instinct. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. He couldn't feel his feet hitting the ground. He just kept moving forward. He fell through his cave's airlock entrance and didn't remember it. He woke up 6 hours later, wrapped in every thermal blanket he owned with severe frostbite on his hands and feet. But he was alive. It took him 3 days to recover enough to move properly. During that time, lying in his sleeping bag and fighting off the pain, he made a decision. He wasn't just going to survive. He was going to build something that would ensure everyone else survived too. He started designing a permanent power system for the cryo facility. Something that would run for years if necessary. Something that would make sure this never happened again. The storm raged above. The ice grew thicker. The temperature kept dropping. But down in his cave, Hyun worked. His hands were bandaged. His body was exhausted. His mind was clear. He was a human. He was an engineer. He had a job to do. And nothing, not even a frozen planet and a 6-month storm, was going to stop him from doing it. Month 4 arrived with little ceremony. Hyun marked it on his calendar with a simple X and continued working. His cave had transformed from a simple shelter into something resembling a real home. The hydroponic garden had expanded to fill one entire wall. He had 30 different plants growing now, providing fresh vegetables and herbs. The air smelled green and alive, a sharp contrast to the frozen death outside. He had built a proper workshop area with tools organized on magnetic strips. A small library of data pads sat in a charging station, filled with every technical manual and book he had downloaded. He even had a small sitting area with a chair he had welded together from scrap metal and cushioned with spare thermal blankets. But the real achievement was outside in the storm. Over the past weeks, Hyun had realized something important. The geothermal heat source under his cave was massive. It was generating far more energy than he needed for his small shelter. He had tapped into that energy, drilling carefully into the hot rock and installing a series of thermoelectric generators. The temperature difference between the hot rock and the frozen surface created electricity. Free, endless electricity. He now had enough power for 10 shelters. More importantly, he had enough power for the cryo facility. The new power system took shape slowly. Every component had to be fabricated by hand in his workshop. He melted down scrap metal from the colony. He repurposed parts from broken equipment. He worked 12 hours a day, taking breaks only to eat, sleep, and tend his garden. The loneliness gnawed at him constantly. He found himself having long conversations with Lettuce Kim and the other plants. He replayed old video messages from his family back on Earth. His sibling Jin had sent him a message before he left, years ago now. Hyun, you're going to do amazing things out there. I know you. You'll build something incredible. You'll help people. That's who you are. Just remember to come home eventually, okay? Mom makes me set a place for you at dinner every night. It's getting weird. He played that message at least once a week. It reminded him that somewhere out there, beyond the frozen hell of this planet, people remembered him. People cared if he lived or died. On day 115, disaster nearly struck again. Hyun was making his weekly trip to the cryo facility when his vehicle's heating system failed. The cabin temperature dropped 40 degrees in minutes. Ice formed on the inside of the windshield. His fingers went numb on the steering controls. He was only halfway to the facility. Turning back meant abandoning his maintenance schedule. The cryopods needed him, but staying in the freezing vehicle meant death. He made a choice that would have seemed insane to anyone else. He stopped the vehicle, grabbed his emergency pack, and started walking. The cryo facility was 8 kilometers away. The temperature outside was minus 185 degrees. The wind was screaming at 370 kilometers per hour. He walked for 5 hours. Every step was a battle. The wind tried to knock him down. Ice crystals shredded any exposed surface. His thermal suit strained to keep him alive. He counted his steps to keep his mind focused. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each number was a small victory against the cold. When he finally reached the cryo facility, his suit's power was at 3%. His core temperature had dropped to dangerous levels. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely work the airlock controls. Inside, he collapsed against the wall and laughed. It was a harsh, wild sound in the empty facility. He had just walked 8 kilometers through conditions that would kill most creatures in minutes, and he had done it because people needed him to. That was very human of him. After he recovered, he completed his maintenance work. The fusion cell was still holding strong. All the cryopods showed green status. 3,217 colonists, all sleeping peacefully, unaware that one stubborn human was keeping them alive. Before leaving, Hyun made a decision. He couldn't keep making these trips. The next vehicle failure might kill him. He needed to install the new power system now, even if it wasn't perfect yet. Something working was better than nothing at all. He spent the next week transporting components from his cave to the cryo facility. Each trip was dangerous. Each trip exhausted him, but slowly, piece by piece, he moved everything he needed. The installation took 3 weeks of brutal work. He had to dig down to the volcanic layer beneath the facility. He had to install the thermoelectric generators. He had to wire everything into the facility's power grid. He worked 18 hours a day, sleeping in a small room inside the facility, eating ration bars and drinking recycled water. His hands bled inside his gloves. His back ached constantly. His eyes burned from strain. But he kept working. On day 160, he threw the final switch. The new power system hummed to life. The facility's lights came on, bright and steady. The cryopod's status boards all showed green. The heating system kicked in, warming the interior spaces. Hyun stood in the main corridor and watched the lights. After months of darkness, the facility was alive again. It would stay alive now, powered by the planet's own heat. It would run for years if necessary. Maybe decades. He had done it. One human with basic tools and stubborn determination had built something that would save thousands of lives. He cried. He didn't plan to. The tears just came, freezing on his cheeks before he could wipe them away. They were tears of exhaustion and relief and pride. When he finally returned to his cave, he slept for 20 hours straight. When he woke, he felt different. Lighter somehow. The crushing responsibility had eased. The colonists were safe now. The power wouldn't fail. They would wake up when the storm ended. He had time now. Time to rest. Time to improve his shelter. Time to think about the future. He expanded his garden, adding new varieties of plants. He organized his workshop better. He even started a small project just for himself, something with no practical purpose. He built a chess set from carved stone, working slowly and carefully on each piece. He played games against himself, talking through the moves out loud. Knight to e5, that's aggressive, Hyun. Are you sure about that? Yes, I'm sure. I know what I'm doing. Do you, though? I literally built a power plant from scratch. I think I can handle a chess game. The conversations with himself didn't seem strange anymore. They were just how he processed thoughts now. The loneliness had changed him, but not broken him. He recorded a video log on day 170. The storm is starting to weaken. Wind speeds are down to 200 kilometers per hour. Temperature is only minus 160 now. That's practically tropical. The cryo facility is running perfectly. Everyone will wake up in about 2 months. I wonder if they'll be surprised. I wonder if they'll believe what I built. I wonder if Velthar will still think their failsafe systems are so great. He laughed at that. It felt good to laugh. The last weeks of the storm passed slowly. Hyun maintained his routine but felt himself getting restless. He was ready for the silence to end, ready to hear voices other than his own, ready to see Day again and tell him everything. He started preparing the cave for visitors. He knew they would come eventually. They would want to see how he survived. He cleaned and organized. He labeled all his systems. He wrote detailed notes about the power system's maintenance requirements. On day 178, he made one final addition to the cave. He carved words into the wall near the entrance using a small laser cutter. The words were simple but true. One human survived here. That was enough. The storm's fury was finally fading. Soon the long night would end. Soon the colony would wake. And they would find that while they slept, one of them had refused to quit. The automated wake-up sequence began at exactly 600 hours on day 185. Inside the cryo facility, thousands of pods started their warming cycles. Chemicals pumped through tubes. Body temperatures slowly rose. Consciousness returned gradually, like emerging from a deep pool of water. Day woke first, as he always did. His body had never liked cryosleep. He gasped as his lungs remembered how to work properly. His fingers twitched. His eyes opened to see the pod's interior display. All green. All normal. He had survived. The pod lid hissed open. Cold air rushed in, but it wasn't the killing cold he expected. It was just normal cold, like a winter morning. He sat up slowly, his muscles stiff and uncooperative. Around him, other pods were opening. People were sitting up, coughing, looking around in confusion. "Where are the lights?" someone asked. Their voice was rough from months of disuse. Day looked up. The facility was fully lit. Bright, steady lights everywhere. That was wrong. The backup power should have failed months ago. They should be waking to darkness and emergency lighting at best. Velthar emerged from their chamber, mandibles clicking in confusion. The power grid. It's functioning. How is that possible? Kaimoon was already at a status terminal, his scaled fingers moving across the display. His eyes widened. This is impossible. The main generators failed on day 5 exactly as predicted. But we have full power, more than full power. The system shows a new power source was installed 97 days ago. Who installed it? Velthar demanded. Everyone was in stasis. Day's heart clenched. Hyun, it had to be Hyun. He stayed awake. He ran. His legs barely worked yet, but he forced them to move. He grabbed a thermal suit from storage and started pulling it on while running toward the exit. Other colonists called after him, but he didn't stop. Outside, the world was transformed. Ice covered everything. The buildings were half buried, but the storm was over. The sky was visible again, a pale pink color as the sun rose. The temperature was minus 40 degrees, cold but survivable with proper equipment. Day's vehicle was buried. Everyone's vehicles were buried. He grabbed a small transport sled and started toward the geological survey site where Hyun had talked about volcanic activity. It was just a guess, but it was the only guess he had. The journey took 3 hours. He had to dig through ice drifts. He had to navigate around frozen debris. His muscles, still weak from cryosleep, screamed in protest. But he kept going. He found the cave entrance purely by accident. His sled hit something metallic buried under the ice. He dug down and found an airlock door. A human-made airlock door that definitely wasn't there 6 months ago. His hands shook as he worked the manual override. The door opened with a hiss. Warm air rushed out. Day nearly cried from relief. Warm air meant heat. Heat meant someone had survived. He climbed down the tunnel, his heart pounding. At the bottom, he found another airlock. This one was unlocked. He pushed through and stopped, staring. The cave was impossible. There was a garden growing on the wall, a workshop with neatly organized tools, a small living area with furniture, and in the center of it all, sleeping on a simple cot, was Hyun. Hyun. Day rushed over and grabbed his friend's shoulder. Hyun woke instantly, his hand going to a wrench beside the cot before he recognized Day's face. Then he smiled, a huge, genuine smile that made him look 10 years younger. Dee, you're awake. Is everyone awake? You survived, Day said. His voice cracked. You actually survived. Of course I survived. I'm stubborn. Hyun sat up and stretched. What time is it? What day? Day 185. Everyone's waking up. Hyun, you kept us alive. The new power system, it's running the whole facility. How did you do this? Hyun shrugged. I had 6 months. Seemed like a waste to just sleep through it. Come on, let me show you around. He gave Day a tour of the cave, explaining each system. The geothermal tap, the thermoelectric generators, the hydroponic garden, his workshop, his daily routine. He spoke casually, as if building an entire survival shelter alone on a frozen planet was nothing special. Day just kept staring at everything. This is incredible. This is beyond incredible. Do you know what you've done? I survived? Hyun offered. You saved 3,000 people. You built technology that shouldn't exist yet. You proved that humans can endure anything. Before Hyun could respond, his cave's communication panel beeped. He had rigged it to connect to the colony's network. Velthar's voice came through. Human Hyun, if you can hear this, please respond. We need to speak with you immediately. Hyun and Day returned to the colony together. Word had spread quickly. Colonists lined the path, staring as Hyun walked past. Humans, Veltharians, Kimunians, and a dozen other species, all alive because one human refused to sleep. The colony's main hall was packed. Velthar stood at the front, all their eyes focused on Hyun as he entered. The room fell silent. Human Hyun, Velthar began. We owe you an apology. You warned us about the power systems. We dismissed your concerns. You were right. We were wrong. Hyun shifted uncomfortably. It's okay. Everyone makes mistakes. It is not okay, Kaimoon said, stepping forward. We nearly killed 3,000 colonists through our arrogance. You saved us all. I have examined your power system. It is brilliant, elegant, efficient. You turned this planet's own heat against its cold. I have never seen anything like it. A young Veltharian named Baum pushed through the crowd. Is it true you were alone for 6 months? How did you not go crazy? Hyun smiled. I had my plans. They're good listeners. Laughter rippled through the hall. Real laughter, warm and relieved. Velthar raised a limb for silence. We must discuss what happens next. The colony's leadership system failed. Our technology failed. Our assumptions were wrong. Human Hyun, we would like you to become our chief of engineering. We need your perspective. Your adaptability. I'm just an engineer, Hyun protested. I'm not a leader. You led us to survival when we chose death, Velthar said simply. That makes you a leader. Hyun looked at Dae, who nodded encouragingly. Then he looked at the crowd. All those faces, human and alien, looking at him with respect and gratitude. He thought about the lonely months in the cave. The constant work, the fear and exhaustion and determination. Okay, he said finally, but I have conditions. First, we redesign all our critical systems with redundancy. Second, we train mixed species teams in survival engineering. Third, someone needs to water my plants while I'm in meetings. More laughter. Velthar clicked their mandibles in approval. Agreed, all of it. The crowd erupted in applause. Hyun felt Dae's hand on his shoulder squeezing tight. Around him, colonists from a dozen worlds were clapping and cheering. For him, for the stubborn human who stayed awake. Later, after the crowds dispersed, Hyun and Dae sat outside the cave entrance, looking at the frozen landscape. The sun was setting, painting the ice in shades of orange and purple. What was it like? Dae asked quietly. Being alone for so long? Hyun thought about it. Lonely, scary, exhausting, but also clarifying. I learned something important. Humans don't give up. Even when it makes sense to give up. Even when everyone says it's impossible. We just keep going. That's our strength. That's terrifying, Dae said. From an outside perspective, humans are terrifying. Hyun laughed. Yeah, we probably are, but it keeps us alive. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. The long night was over. The colony had survived, and everyone knew that when the impossible became real, it was because a human refused to accept it as impossible. 6 months after the thaw, the colony barely resembled its former self. Hyun stood on the observation deck of the new central hub, watching construction crews work on the expanded residential sections. Mixed species teams worked together, combining different approaches to building. The Veltharians brought their organic construction methods. The Communians contributed their precise mathematical planning. The humans added their practical adaptability. Everything was different now. The biggest change was in the engineering philosophy. Every building now had multiple backup systems. Every critical facility had geothermal power access. Every storage area contained emergency supplies rated for 6 months of isolation. The colony had learned its lesson. Hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Hyun's cave had become a training site. Every new engineer, regardless of species, spent a week there learning survival techniques. They studied his improvised systems. They practiced building shelters with limited resources. They learned that sometimes the best technology was the technology you could build with your own hands. Dae found him on the observation deck. There you are. The council meeting is in 10 minutes. You're going to be late again. I'm watching the future being built, Hyun said. That's more important than another meeting. The meeting is about you, Dae pointed out. The memorial dedication, Hyun groaned. I told them I don't need a memorial. I'm not dead. Try telling that to Velthar. They've been planning this for weeks. They walked together to the council chambers. The room had changed too. Instead of one species architecture dominating, it was now a blend of different styles. Comfortable for everyone, perfect for no one, functional for all. The council consisted of representatives from each species group. Velthar still led the Veltharians. Kaimoon represented his people. A human named Nari spoke for the human colonists. She was young, only 25, but sharp and confident. Hyun, thank you for joining us, Velthar began. We wanted to inform you that the memorial is complete. We would like you to see it before the public dedication tomorrow. Is it too late to cancel? Hyun asked. Much too late, Kaimoon said, his scales rippling with amusement. News of your survival has spread across the galaxy. Ships arrive weekly, bringing engineers who want to study your work. The Galactic Council has designated this colony as a case study in survival engineering. You are famous whether you like it or not. Hyun definitely did not like it. Fame meant attention. Attention meant expectations. He just wanted to build things and solve problems. They led him outside to the colony's central plaza. A crowd was already gathering despite the early hour. At the center of the plaza stood a new structure. It was made from the same volcanic rock as his cave, shaped into a tall pillar. Words were carved into all four sides in multiple languages. Hyun read the human script. Here stands the proof that one person's determination can save thousands. When the storm came and all wisdom said to sleep, one human stayed awake. When cold meant death, one human found warmth. When isolation meant madness, one human built hope. Let this remind all who see it that surrender is not inevitable, that adaptation is strength, that one voice saying I can is worth more than 1,000 saying you can't. Below that was a simpler line. To Hyun, who stayed awake. Hyun felt his throat tighten. He touched the stone, feeling its warmth. They had used geothermal heating in the monument itself. It would stay warm forever, a reminder that hope could be built into the very structure of things. It's good, he managed to say. Young Baum pushed through the crowd. The Veltharian had become Hyun's unofficial apprentice, following him everywhere and asking endless questions. Teacher Hyun, is it true that humans don't have a hibernation instinct at all? We can sleep, Hyun said. We just don't have to. That explains so much about your species, Baum said seriously. You're all slightly insane. The crowd laughed. Hyun ruffled Baum's antennae affectionately. Probably, but it works for us. The dedication ceremony the next day drew colonists from across the settlement. Felthar gave a speech about learning from mistakes. Kaimun presented a technical paper on Hyun's geothermal systems that had been published in the Galactic Engineering Journal. Nari spoke about human perseverance. When it was Hyun's turn to speak, he kept it short. I'm not a hero. I'm an engineer who did what engineers do. I saw a problem and fixed it. The real story isn't that one human survived. The real story is that 3,000 people from dozens of worlds are alive and working together. That's the part worth celebrating. But he knew they wouldn't listen. They wanted their hero story. They needed it. The storm had scared everyone badly. They needed to believe that survival was possible, even in impossible situations. Later, he stood with Day and Nari, watching children play near the monument. A group of young humans were teaching Veltharian, children a game from Earth. The aliens' translator devices were working overtime to keep up with the excited chatter. I got a message. From the Galactic Council, Nari said. They want human engineers for an emergency project on the rim worlds. A mining colony is having environmental problems. The other species want to evacuate. They want humans to see if there's a way to stay. Of course they do, Day laughed. We're the crazy species that doesn't know when to quit. Will you go? Nari asked Hyun. Hyun watched the children playing. One small human girl was trying to teach a Kaimunian child how to climb. The reptilian was struggling, but the girl was patient, showing him where to put his hands and feet. No, Hyun said. My work is here, training the next generation, but I'll send them my notes, my techniques, everything I learned. That's the real legacy. Not what one human did alone, but what humans can teach others. Spoken like a true teacher, Velthar said, joining them. I have news. The colony's population will triple next year. Word of our survival has made this world desirable again. We will need to expand significantly. More geothermal taps, Hyun said immediately. More redundant systems. More training facilities already approved, Velthar said. We learn from our mistakes. Though I must admit, it took a human nearly dying to teach us that lesson. Nearly dying is a human specialty, Day said. They all laughed at that. It was true enough. That evening, Hyun returned to his cave one last time. It would become a museum soon, preserved exactly as it was during the storm. He walked through the space, touching the walls, remembering the lonely months. The fear, the exhaustion, the stubborn refusal to give up. He sat in his old chair and pulled up a video log. His own face looked back at him from months ago, tired and alone. Day 43. Storm intensity at 90%. I'm running low on coffee. That's probably the worst part. He smiled at his past self. That Hyun had no idea if he would survive, but he had kept working anyway. That was the human way. Work the problem until there's no problem left. He recorded one final log. This is Hyun's last entry from the cave. Tomorrow this becomes history. The storm is over. The colony is safe. Everyone is working together better than before. I learned something during those months alone. Humans survive not because we're stronger or smarter, but because we're too stubborn to know when we should quit. That stubbornness saved 3,000 lives. Maybe it'll save more, I hope so, because the galaxy is big and dangerous and it needs people who refuse to give up. He switched off the recorder and looked around the cave one last time. On the wall, his carved words still glowed faintly from the thermal heating. One human survived here. That was enough. He left the cave and sealed it behind him. Tomorrow it would open as a training site and museum. But tonight it was just a memory. A reminder that impossible was just another word for difficult. Above, the stars shone clearly in the night sky. Ships were arriving and leaving constantly now, bringing supplies and people and news from across the galaxy. The colony was no longer isolated. It was connected, important, known, and it was all because one human had stayed awake when everyone else chose to sleep. Yun walked back to his new quarters in the colony proper. Tomorrow there would be meetings and training sessions and probably more speeches, but tonight he could rest. The work was done. The colony was safe. The future was secure. He had been just an engineer trying to solve a problem, but he had become something else. A symbol, a reminder, proof that determination and preparation could overcome impossible odds. The galaxy had learned something important. When things got difficult, when situations seemed hopeless, when every rational choice pointed toward surrender, there was always another option. Call a human. Humans didn't know how to quit, and sometimes that made all the difference.